What kind of advice do you have to homeowners?
Practicing that preparedness. Starting the conversation now is always going to be a benefit to any association out there.
And welcome to the Recovery Report Live, Global Pro's deep dive into relevant business and insurance topics, providing actionable takeaways and valuable insights. We aim to update, educate, and inform you weekly. I'm Dan Odess, president of Global Pro, where we manage risk to recovery. For more than a decade, we have represented thousands of businesses and community associations in the placement of insurance and the recovery from over $1 billion in damages. We are your source for insurance news you can use. So we are headed into the notoriously active part of the storm seasons, and no greater indication than the storms that are out there. In the matter of hours, we went from 1 to 3 areas of interest, and now one named storm, Tropical Storm Gonzalo, and soon to be Tropical Storm Hannah. Gonzalo is making its way across the Atlantic, and Tropical Depression 8, soon to be Hannah, is stirring things up in the Gulf, threatening the Texas and Louisiana coastline. This is obviously a good time to remind all of you about ways to properly prepare. This is more important now due to the pandemic raging in the United States. The pandemic adds a layer of complexity to your preparation. Government-imposed curfews and travel restrictions abroad and inside the country limit a person's ability to evacuate. How is this going to work? How is our government going to manage historically overcrowded shelters? Supply chains are already under a tremendous amount of stress. Do you have the supplies you need if you had to stay put? Let's discuss how your hurricane preparedness is different now in the wake of a pandemic by comparing and contrasting a typical storm season with a storm season in a pandemic. First off, supplies are already limited. Usually we get just enough and then resupply. However, it may take longer for areas to get more supplies. So consider longer delays in the restocking of shelves. Evacuation plans may be limited. Many hotels are already closed and have limited operations. So last-minute bookings may not be possible, and room supplies are historically already low. Also, consider that you won't be able to freely move about the hotel, and a lot of amenities may be closed. Unit owners will have to shelter in place. In prior storm seasons, we saw board members fighting unit owners to evacuate. However, the board and the unit owners may not have any choice but to shelter in place, meaning you need to turn your building around and get it back to operation even faster, and it's so much more critical. Access to condominium units may require more notice and cause delays. If you manage an association or if you are a board member, have a plan to gain access to units in the event that the building is damaged. You need to be able to mitigate damages and inspect with your insurance company. Consider what your personal protection gear your staff and contractors may need in order to safely conduct business. And lastly, get expert help. Following Hurricane Irma, Global Pro was able to quickly recover around over $100 million in claims in less than 4 months. Sadly, we are still fielding calls and emails from associations that never recovered. Don't wait for your insurance company to lowball your claim and delay your recovery. Don't expect your agent to fight your battles because they legally can't. Avoid the fight, avoid the delays, and avoid the infighting with unit owners about the timing of repairs and special assessments. Contact Global Pro now to prepare. During to document the damage, or after to handle a claim from initial reporting through settlement. Don't believe me? Watch the testimonies on our website or contact us for a list of qualified references. On the topic of hurricane preparedness for community associations, I want to bring on our special guest today that is certainly a leader in the community association legal industry and a very well-dressed gentleman, Roberto Blanch of Siegfried Rivera. Robbie has been a member of the firm since 2001 and concentrates his practice in community association law. He represents condominiums and homeowner associations throughout Florida, handling a broad range of legal issues pertaining to the operation and management of community associations. Mr. Blanch handles all aspects of community association law, including but unlimited covenant enforcement, interpretation of governing documents, vendor contract negotiations and drafting, amending government documents, preparing for and attending board membership meetings, elections and recalls, collections, fair housing issues, and insurance claims. He also assists associations who are undertaking the turnover process, guiding them to the hiring of experts and representing them in construction defect claims. Mr. Blanch, has been designated by the Florida Bar as a board-certified specialist in condominiums and plan development law in the state of Florida. We are so privileged to have you on today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, Robbie. Welcome aboard.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you for the well-dressed part, though. I don't think any of us have put in a suit in the last 4 months, but I'm kind of getting used to this.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what's from the waist down. It's only what you got up top. So I think a lot of people forgot they even have pants in some of these broadcasts. That's for sure. All right, Robbie. Well, a hurricane is bad enough. The pandemic is really bad. But a hurricane in the middle of a pandemic, where do we even begin? 6 named storms and another one on the way. Are associations planning and taking action, and what are they doing differently?
I mean, they should be. We've been counseling associations to be very active. It seems that anything that can go wrong in 2020 will go wrong. So we've previously commented, it's not a matter of whether if we're gonna get a storm, but how many. At least that's the way things are shaping out. And not that we can predict the future, but I think it does make sense to be over prepared than under prepared in this type of situation, especially in light of everything you mentioned in your introduction with regard to supply lines and other things that also are we can discuss later on, but finances as well. Not only may supplies be limited, but potentially many have been predicting limits in financial resources for associations.
Absolutely. And in the wake of Hurricane Irma, we saw many associations special assess and obtain credit lines to offset the cost of their deductibles. What are the budget concerns for preparing and recovering from a loss with an expected rise in delinquencies due to the pandemic?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that with regard to the last major hurricane that hit our area, and that is because what we have been seeing as a result of or early on in the stages of this pandemic has been many community associations already tapping into relationships with their lenders to place them in a position that they can address anticipated shortfalls in the level of assessments that are going to be paid to the associations. And so as far as an association's borrowing capacity may go, they may potentially be unable to reach out to that traditional source of revenue or the traditional source of funding vis-a-vis a credit line or borrowing, as they may have done in previous hurricane or storm seasons, because they may have already tapped into that source as a result of the anticipated monetary shortfalls due to the pandemic. So I do wonder what other options they may have to the extent that borrowing either may be dried up for them or maybe not that much.
Yeah, because I've seen where banks will use the rate of delinquencies as their part of the credit reporting, and then will lend based on that. So it's and what we're talking about here is unit owners. And the impacts really based on financial decisions made by board members and how they can, in the wake of these hurricanes, quickly recover and make up for what they can't recover from their insurance based on restrictions on policies or exclusions or excessive deductibles, because all of a sudden that 3% deductible is looking a hell of a lot more attractive than the 5% that they didn't consider. So what can an association legally and properly do to prepare their unit owners for evacuation during the pandemic?
Well, what an association should do with regard to planning for these types of disasters is no different than what they've done previously. Of course, we've got an added wrinkle in that now we're dealing with a pandemic, and so those variables are going to have to come into play with regard to the plan. But what an association should do is many of the associations that we represent, if not all of them, are professionally managed associations, and also have availed themselves of relationships with professionals and vendors throughout the years. So this needs to be a concerted effort and well choreographed effort with everybody. They do need to already start taking, paying attention to the emergency powers, for instance, in the Condominium Act. Homeowner associations have comparable emergency powers, as do cooperatives. Those emergency powers were originally created in connection with the types of emergency situations that you and I are used to, right? The storms, the hurricanes, they've been stretched and used in connection with this pandemic. And most recently, members of the Real Property and Probate Trust Law section of the Florida Bar are coordinating changes with the legislature to modify the emergency powers to a broader scope of emergencies that previously none of us had really thought about, i.e. in this world, the pandemic. And so the major part of this emergency powers is you need to wait for an emergency order to be issued or declared in the area in which your condominium is located, which already exists, but one would suggest that with regard to hurricanes, it needs to be modified to address a hurricane. And in that, you've got to come up with a disaster plan. The association has the right to implement a disaster plan. So they got to start working on these disaster plans, start reaching out to consultants such as the lawyers, such as the bankers, such as the insurance professionals, vendors, suppliers of fuel, et cetera, because they do need to get an understanding as to what supply lines are going to be, where are owners going to go in the event that you are in an evacuation zone. As you mentioned earlier, hotels are really not that viable of an option. Shelters are not that viable of an option. What if some of your residents are COVID positive and are in quarantine? They've got very few options of what they can do, and hospitals really don't seem to be much of an option. So I think all of these factors need to be involved in the dialogue, which underscores the importance to have this conversation now. If not a few months ago, we should have been having it.
All good information, and the discussion about the acts and about evacuations, and there's travel restrictions. To and from states, you saw where at first Florida wasn't accepting anyone from New York, and then New York turned around and restricts access for Floridians to New York. And I do know that after Hurricane Irma, there was quite a few Floridians that went to New York to escape the storm as part of the evacuation. But we have also curfews to contend with. A lot of times you see a lot of recovery efforts that happen in the wee hours at night and around the clock. But again, your movements about our community are restricted. How do you think that this will impact those recovery plans that you talked about and the possibility of evacuating the building?
Well, without a doubt, I think there's going to be major disruptions, God forbid, if we do have one of these storms, particularly because of all those limitations. For instance, our association is going to be able to have that much access to the borrowing, and we've mentioned that earlier. Okay. We also forecasted some type of downfall in the collection of assessments, and even though we really haven't seen that happening, I believe now with the elimination of the help and the aid from the government and how that might be helping some of the unemployed, are we going to be seeing that those shortfalls happen? Moreover, you've heard utility providers indicating how some of their relief resources from other states that we've usually depended upon may be significantly affected. And so prepare yourself for longer rebuilding, and your own vendors that you may typically count on to come to your property may also be limited in with regard to their workforce, not only because of the depletion of their workforce because of the pandemic, but also because they may not be able to tap into other personnel. Maybe they have to take some disinfecting or sterilization measures as well that they usually didn't have to contend with. So there are so many new factors to contend with that we presume they're only going to produce delays in the recovery resulting from a storm.
Yeah, I was recently talking with one of the top mitigation companies in South Florida region here about a storm and what it would be like to actually get onto a property and to mitigate damage, where we saw a tremendous amount of windows or water damage in the interior of these units. And one of his biggest concerns was just the amount of time it would take to get on and then off a property to then go handle another disaster situation at another association's property. He says it's going to take longer to do that. He goes, our guys got to suit up, PPE gear. They got to make sure they have it all. Maybe they don't have enough on the truck, then they had to go get more. So again, something to consider: does your contractor have enough resources And I know that a lot of these mitigation companies are part of networks of people where they pull resources, just like the electrical FP&L does. And can those people actually travel here, and how do those travel restrictions impact their business as well? All right, but now that's a little bit about preparing for it. Now let's talk about a little bit about, okay, the storm hit and now we're trying to recover. If the building did evacuate, how can a unit owners prepare differently for returning to a building where they did evacuate in this pandemic?
I just believe that the owners need to be prepared for disruption. They need to be prepared. This is not business as usual. If we haven't gotten that message yet, right, in the last 4 months, this message is going to continue to resonate until we're on the other end of this pandemic. And so, you know, be prepared to stay out of the condo that much longer. Be prepared for the association to let you know, hey, we've come up with a plan. And again, it goes back to what we said earlier. It goes back to planning, because the association needs to, when you review the emergency powers and it talks about a disaster plan, in order to be able to evacuate your building and then re-inhabit, let's call it, repopulate the building, you need to be relying upon advice of either emergency management or licensed professionals that the association may be retaining. So you need to already have, you know, I don't know about you, but my experience thus far with waiting for the emergency, you know, governmental people to give us any type of advice has been very spotty. And so I think that we're all well advised to start reaching out to our own licensed professionals that might be able to give us some better advice as to how to repopulate or re-inhabit the buildings post hurricanes, and how to do it in an organized manner, in a safe manner. And so I think that we got to continue preaching this patience to the people that are evacuated in the event that they are evacuated, and they need to already start taking into account where they're going to be able to go, you know, and of course that also is more of a complicated analysis, because where you're going to go also depends on from where a storm is coming and potentially where it's going. So, you know, we don't have that many options in our state as to where we can go. And those options in a pandemic are even, you know, more difficult and more limited.
And I like the word spotty. I like to use the word inconsistent. I find that after every major event that I've been involved with, whether it's hurricanes to fires to hailstorm, tornadoes, whatever else, the emergency response team, depends on who you talk to, when you talk to them. It's very inconsistent. So you gotta, you know, choose a source, make sure it is a credible source. But because know that if you ask them and then go to someone else, a lot of times there is some inconsistencies in it. That's why I always tell people, I go, the Weather Channel is great, and a few of these other, you know, Channel 7 and some others are you know, do a good job of reporting on it. I like NOAA. You know, I like to just, you know, that's usually where they get it from anyways, as it relates to hurricanes. So, you know, make sure, you know, look at the credibility and be consistent in sourcing that information. And so I want to stay on the topic of the combined issue because I think it's something that's relevant, obviously, with the threat of Gonzalo, and because the pandemic doesn't seem to be letting up anytime soon. But I also want to talk a little. I want to add in another element here, which is that we saw a good economy coming into this pandemic, and we saw an explosion of construction projects. Whether it was new buildings up out of the ground to renovations or associations deciding to finally jump on those capital improvement projects. What steps can property managers take right now to protect an association with an ongoing construction project in light of the threatening storm in the pandemic?
We go back to the same answer we've had earlier. You know, these are questions that to you and I might seem, or topics that to you and I might seem logical and common sense, but you'd be amazed how many of our clients don't have, you know, they might have great plans for, you know, where they're going to get fuel for their generators. They might have great plans for how they're going to close up hurricane shutters in their building and have items removed from unit owners' balconies. But you know, it surprises me how few of them have plans for their contractors that might be scaffolding or hanging swing stages off of buildings and doing either balcony replacement projects or concrete restoration or window replacement projects. And also, how those vendors continue working to the last minute on repairing the building or replace, doing whatever their scope of work is, rather than demobilizing and protecting the property in connection with what may be coming, right? And so I do believe that buildings need to have the dialogue with those vendors, with those contractors. Hey guys, what is your game plan if we get a tropical storm warning? If there's a storm coming, who's going to pay for this? Is the association going to be expected to pay for this, or is this part of your responsibility? I mean, it goes back even into the contract negotiation stage when you're negotiating with these contractors. And then, of course, already having the dialogue, okay, how are we going to remobilize? And how quickly are you going to be able to do it? And what resources do you have? And what plan do you have? And this conversation may be so far in the back of our minds, given everything else that's going on, but it does have to be part, in the forefront of your mind, especially in light of where we are right now.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you hit on was the contracts. You talked a bit about money. And I kind of feel like once you start that project and you get into it, I find a lot of associations are afraid to have those conversations again. They don't want to talk about the money. They don't want to talk about the contract. They just want to talk about the project, the progress of the project itself, and what's coming, rather than, okay, let's run through a scenario, guys. Let's do a dry run, if you will. Where are you going? What are you doing? And then when are you coming back? And how are we going to start this back up? And who's paying for what? And do we have the reserves for it? Are we, properly capitalized to actually finish this project at that point? I think, addressing those issues head on, as you said, is just absolutely imperative to any sort of success you're going to have, and trying to deal with this type of situation. Because this really it just goes right into my next question, is that, with all that being said, what do you think is the single biggest and greatest challenge to these associations over the next, let's say, 6 months to a year? Let's say even if a storm doesn't hit, or maybe the pandemic does curb. What do you think is the greatest challenge to the associations?
I think there's a few. I do believe communication is always a major issue. And frankly, I think sometimes, even if you don't have anything to say or you don't have any new information, at least say that. I don't believe that. Every industry is in that. The education industry is in that, right? We still don't know where our kids are going to be going to school, or how they're going to be going to school, come August. And it's not bad to say that, but at a minimum, we got to have that communication, that dialogue taking place. I also think associations need to continue aggressively pursuing their finances, aggressively positioning themselves in a position for financial hardship. I just think it's inevitable. It's going to come. It may not have hit us hard yet in most of our condo businesses, but I just, God willing, it doesn't happen. And we are relatively unscathed, when we come out on the other end of this. But I think all indicators are pointing at an opposite situation. And so we got to be prepared for that. And then also just making sure that the property is in a position to be able to address this. Let's make sure that we can handle the owners that might think that the property is not safe enough, and explain to them why it is. And those owners that think that we're overkilling with sanitation and making sure everything is disinfected and clean, and that certain amenities may not be open. We and it goes back to the communication aspect, and owners need to understand why it is that certain amenities can't be available or can't be open. Look at where Miami-Dade County is right now compared to the rest of the nation, and we're not used to people telling us no, or you can't, or you shouldn't do stuff, and I think numbers are indicating why it is that may happen, but we're a stubborn people, so patience at the end of the day is the last advice for associations. Patience pays.
Yes, patient pays. Take your time, slow down. I say it at the end of every single one of my CE classes. I could navigate more for that. You talked about the shutdown of the common area elements. it's almost like the silver lining, right? I mean, as it relates to hurricane preparedness and getting back to business. Not to say that really anything good has come out of the pandemic, but I would say that for an association trying to manage the disaster and the recovery, your common area is already shut down. And one of the biggest frustrating or points of friction that we see after a storm, or a lot of snowbirds that come down in November, December, following a active storm season and want their tennis courts or want to go to the pool. But every tree on the property is down or broken, every piece of fencing, and the priorities were there. And because they weren't there when it happened, their priorities have shifted to enjoying why they have the condo as opposed to recovering from the actual storm itself. Do you see this as an advantage heading into this potential active period of the storm season?
Well, I mean, if nothing else, at least we've had, as you stated earlier, a dry run, right? We're kind of like now people are used to not having certain luxuries, certain amenities. I don't know if it's going to frustrate people more than anything else, but at a minimum, managers know and now have some type of experience and understanding about how to go about closing it, how to build that thicker level of skin, when the owners start complaining. And by the way, they complain on both sides. As I stated earlier, they complain, some of your population is complaining because they think you're not doing enough to keep people safe. And other parts of the population are complaining because they think you're overkilling it. And then, people need to be educated and say, look, condos, we're not police. We are not, the condo managers, the condo board members, if there are violations, we don't have the ability to arrest anybody, right? In the 20 years I've been doing this, I haven't seen any law be either proposed or enacted that says that a condo board or manager is going to have the power to forcibly either detain somebody or push them out of places. So, education needs to be put out there to the community. And when you decide to live in a condo, whatever the circumstances may be, you're expected to give up a certain level and a certain expectation, whether it's of your liberties or of your privacy, but you got to check those at the door. And while you got to be able to live and coexist with people, you also got to recognize that a lot of what you're doing and a lot of what is being implemented is to protect the population of that building, the people that work there, and the vendors that are providing services to you, and provide for their safety, health, and welfare as well. So,
all great advice, all good points, Robbie. And for our guests tuning in today, how can they get in contact with you and Siegfried Rivera?
Nowadays it's very simple. SiegfriedRivera.com. You go on our website. I understand we have all the social media outlet as well. So you do the Twitter and I don't know if we've got the TikTok going on. My kids will favor that.
Gotta be careful with that.
You've got Facebook, the LinkedIn, the Twitter. We're there as well, and also my email address rblanch@siegfriedrivera.com, and of course Siegfried IE after the S and IE after the FR. So siegfriedrivera.com. Our office is Coral Gables, Broward, and Palm Beach as well. Though right now we've got a bunch of offices. I'm in my in my home office, so we're around. We're around. You can find us, and we're happy to help anybody who's watching and listening.
Easy and conveniently located. But one last really important question: how's the golf game been?
Not as good as I'd like for it to be. Never is. But believe it or not, we've been working more in this pandemic than one would have forecasted at the beginning, right?
Yeah. Mine has been non-existent. Not that it was really that good anyway. So if I need to get out there in the links with you sometime soon. But Robbie, huge thanks to you and all of our attendees that tuned in this week. Go online at getglobalpro.com. Check out our website. Click the resource section to read and download important information you need to be prepared. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel to watch today's broadcast. Like us, follow us, and engage us on all the social media platforms. We love to connect with our clients and community, so call us anytime at 855-487-7475. or shoot us an email at recover@getglobalpro.com. Again, thank you, Robbie, and all of our attendees for tuning in this week on the Recovery Report Live.